donc on prononce...
Ouais. On disait. Pas mal notre intuition.
Ouais.
Voilà.
Là, c'est bien. On est déjà sur YouTube. Et Madame Alina va faire votre présentation et démarrer la présentation.
2 minutes plus.
Ouais.
Pour qu'on commence à 14
on
heures.
patiente jusqu'à 19 heures. OK.
Ouais,
Ça
ouais.
marche.
Pardon, 14 heures chez vous.
Bon, c'est pas une communauté aussi grande que ça ici sur place, mais on sait qu'on a davantage de gens intéressés en ligne.
Oui, oui, j'ai regardé le programme et donc j'ai vu qu'il y avait beaucoup de choses, mais j'ai compris que tout le monde n'était pas sur place. Oui, c'est ça.
Ouais, ouais. Donc, c'est difficile de faire les gens voyager dans le Brésil parce que les voyages sont assez chers et enfin, on a appris à le faire en ligne avec la
C'est
pandémie.
ça, hein. Ces dernières années, on a tous appris à fonctionner et à être à l'aise avec Zoom. C'est nouveau, mais c'est vrai que ça a son utilité pour limiter un petit peu les voyages.
Ouais, c'était le nouveau normal. Maintenant, heureusement que c'est plus le nouveau normal, c'est l'ancien normal.
Exactement.
Ah, bon, alors on commence. Je salue tout le monde en português e puis on reprend en anglais. Então, boa tarde a todos. Vamos recomeçar esta tarde com uma conferência do professor Vincent Renner, que vai falar em inglês, apesar de ser francês, achando que essa é a língua que, apesar de tudo, nos serve melhor de comunicação. Eu também vou fazer a introdução em inglês, claro. So welcome, Professor Vincent Renner. We are very glad to welcome you here. It's a bit difficult to go in between French, Portuguese, and English, but we still have to do it in English. We are very pleased to have you here as a blend specialist and to listen to your talk about which is called Is the Sky Acre the Limit? As you can see it on the screen, reflections on the new the new frontiers of lexical blending. Thank you very much. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your introduction. Thank you for this invitation. I hope everyone can hear me and see me, and primarily see the slideshow. So I'm very excited to be here because I had a look at the conference program, as I was saying a few minutes ago in French. So to all of you, I'm very excited to see that there is a community of scholars in Brazil, the whole of Brazil, and maybe beyond, with a keen interest.
Sorry, Vincent, just ask you to speak a little bit closer from the microphone or louder, please.
Oh, closer. Okay, is it better like this?
No, there was a problem.
It was very good before, but something changed.
Okay, I didn't do anything. I didn't change anything. Is it any better right now?
No.
You cannot hear me, is that it?
On vous écoute, mais pas très bien. C'est un peu étouffé.
C'est très bizarre parce que j'ai rien changé et moi je vous entends très bien.
Ouais.
Est-ce que vous m'entendez? C'est toujours étouffé? Est-ce que vous m'entendez mieux?
Super, là c'est parfait. Merci beaucoup.
Bon, j'ai rien touché, hein. J'ai rien touché. Donc j'espère que
ça a été moi, ouais.
Ok, donc j'espère que ça va marcher. Ok, n'hésitez pas, hein, s'il y a un souci, vous m'arrêtez. All right, let's try to switch back to English for this presentation. So yes, I'm very excited to be here today. I think that this is only the second time there has been a conference focused only on lexical blending. I had the privilege to organize one about 13 years ago. And since then, there has been a growing interest in lexical blends, but not as much as this workshop. So I'm looking forward to the discussion, the questions and answers you may have, we may share at the end of this presentation. So let me start, and I'm going to move to my first slide. I hope it's going okay. I would like to start with a quotation from Professor Laurie Bauer, who is a well-known morphologist, and who is also, I guess, a blend lover. And this is a quotation from one of his latest books in 2021. I'm going to read the quotation. Blends are words for special occasions, not for everyday wear, and a good blend must be treasured. We could discuss, but I'm not sure we should do that right now, the meaning of the possible meanings of the first part of this quotation. I'm just going to focus on the second part because I just like this simple sentence. A good blend must be treasured. And I imagine that those of you who have a keen interest in blends might agree with that statement. And so what I would like to do as a starting point, which will also be an explanation of the title of my presentation, because this may be a bit mysterious for some of you, I would like to share a treasure with you, which is a blend I have come across not long ago, which is Skyacre. And of course, it's to put you in condition. If you are not aware of this new English word, you have to make guesses, just like everyone has to make guesses when encountering a new word, especially when it is a blend, not respecting word boundaries. You have to make guesses, more or less educated guesses. And it may not be easy. Typically, you know that what is expected is for people to try to make guesses, educated guesses about the 2 or sometimes 3 source words. So here, I think the word is not too complex. So we may say that we have only 2 source words. I don't know if everyone can make a guess, and if it's not easy and straightforward, I can give you some clues, because of course, typically people rely on the surrounding discourse, on context to elicit the meaning of a blend through the source words that led to the construction of the new form. So let me give you some additional information, which is the pronunciation of the blend, because it may help some of you. Skyacre. And the idea when one is trying to decode a blend is, when possible, to realize that in many cases, not all cases, but in many cases, you may already know that we have, at least typically in English, one or several shared segments. And so here, for those of you who haven't found the 2 source words, I will emphasize the symbols are in blue, that actually Chi, we have 2 segments that are shared by source word number 1, source word number 2. And finally, to confirm your intuition, I will share the secret of this treasured blend. Skyacre refers to kayaker from the sky. So sky plus kayaker. And here the S in red shows you that if you compare the form of the second source word, kayaker, with the whole blend, the only difference is minimal. It is only this initial S that has been added because of the blending of the shared segment, K and I. And I believe that it may be the reason why we can say that it is a good blend, and maybe it would be one to treasure. It's up to you. So this is an interesting word referring to an interesting and surprising concept. I guess the two are linked. And I'd like to give you some background on this sport, which is called kayaking. And I'm quoting here from a web page describing bizarre adventure sports, including kayaking, a perspective which in a way is linguistic, because this is some sort of a basic reflection on the linguistic creation of new denominations. So I'm going to read this short paragraph. Adrenaline junkies have a reputation for pushing the limits, defying gravity and the laws of physics to overcome seemingly unsurmountable challenges. Sometimes the usual gambit of extreme sports, from snowboarding to cliff diving, isn't enough for a thrill seeker. That's where a bizarre offshoot of adventure sports comes in. Based on some pre-existing sport, athletes give it a unique twist. I thought this was an interesting description of the creation of this new concept, and behind it also of the new term for the sport in question, kayaking. But when I read this paragraph, I also had some sort of an epiphany, because I realized that it seemed to me to be a very good metaphor of actually bizarre neology. So if you will excuse me, I'm going to retain the general structure of this paragraph, but adapted to the perspective of a linguist interested in neology, and hopefully I will be convincing enough that this is interestingly a fairly apt metaphor for what has happened in the creation of kayaking. So I will read the paragraph again with changes, adaptations, and let's imagine that now we're talking about bizarre morphological outputs. I think it works. We can say that neology junkies have a reputation for pushing the limits, defying gravity and the laws of linguistics to overcome seemingly unsurmountable challenges. Sometimes the usual gambit of extreme concatenation, from pseudo-hypoparathyroidism to muddle, puddle, tweedle, poodle, beetle, noodle, bottle, paddle, battle, isn't enough for a thrill seeker. And that's where a bizarre offshoot of constructional morphology comes in, based on some pre-existing lexemes. Wordsmiths give it a unique twist, and the unique twist is not simply the concept of kayaking, but also the new formal output, which happens to be a blend. So I think this would be a fairly great characterization of what blends are. This was my sport/linguistic introduction, and now I'm moving on to discuss purely linguistic things, because I am not an expert in kayaking. I've never been a kayaker. Here's the general outline of my presentation. I'm going to talk about the new frontiers of the concept of lexical blending, and then I'll move on to a quick discussion of the frontiers of the areal distribution of lexical blending in the languages of the world. Then I will discuss variability in output creation, and finally, I want to focus on the new frontiers of blending research, what, in my view, are the most interesting avenues of research for the near or not so near future. As you may know, blends are everywhere, or blends seem to be everywhere, and I'm just illustrating this with a number of catchy blends, which I have found over the years, starting with Heinz. For some time, because I think it was only temporary, Heinz had the idea of creating new, crazy, blended, I have to say, sauces. One was called Mayo Chup, the second one was Mayo Must, the third one was Crunch, and the last one was Mayo Q. And as you can guess, all those neologisms were based on a blending pattern, and it's fairly easy to recognize the source words. First one is mayo plus ketchup. The second one is mayo plus mustard. The third one is ketchup plus ranch, and finally mayo plus barbecue. Another example from a McDonald's ad from 2016, when we had the Euro soccer tournament in France at the time, and a lot of European country national teams were in France to play soccer. And you can guess that here, this symbolizes the union of, I guess, the supporting crowd for the team of Sweden on the one hand, and Italy on the other hand. And so we have something like Sweetily. And finally, for those of you who may be familiar with French and the situation in France, there has been somewhat of a controversy recently when a very famous and respected dictionary introduced a new inclusive pronoun, third-person pronoun, which happens to be a blend of the masculine pronoun il and the feminine pronoun elle, and this gives yell. So blends are everywhere. And in many languages, I understand and I imagine that your focus during this workshop is primarily on Brazilian Portuguese. As you know, blends are popular in English. I believe that they're also popular in French, and I will discuss in a few minutes the spread of the phenomenon. But first, of course, we need to have a few words about the definition of the concept. I don't want to say too much. I'll go back to my own definition of blending, and maybe this will trigger some questions and some discussion after the presentation. My own perception and definition of lexical blending is quite broad, open, and inclusive. I believe that we can situate blending between two extremes. The first extreme would be compounding, and the other extreme would be initialization. It's fairly easy to define and recognize compounding. You simply have the juxtaposition of two source words. You have no subtraction of any material, and I consider that as soon as strict concatenation, combination is not respected, we can consider that we have a case of blending. The only limit I would put to blending is extreme subtraction, which, as far as I know, only takes place at the right edge of words. So if you only retain initials from all of the source words, we end up with what is typically considered another process, which I call initialization. I'm giving you an illustration of this. Graphics plus interface plus format gives GIF or GIF. I believe the two pronunciations are okay. And so this GIF comes from the G from graphics and the I from interface, and finally the S from format. So I would say that in that case, we don't have blending anymore. But between that, no subtraction on the one hand, an extreme right H subtraction on the other hand, I believe that we should consider that we have blending. I will come back to this in a minute or in a few minutes. In the meantime, I will introduce what I believe is a typical blend. A typical blend is, for example, taking the beginning of the source word xylophone and the ending of the word marimba to create an output, which is xylorimba. It looks like a good blend to me. Same thing with smaze, which comes from the beginning of smoke and the end of aze. And so my favorite style of representation is to say that A is the beginning of the first source word, B is the ending of the first source word, C is the beginning, symbolizes the beginning of the second source word, and D, the ending of the second source word. So this is an AD pattern, as I call it. Interestingly, in a number of cases, we can say that we don't have typical subtraction, that non-concatenation only occurs because of some overlapping of the segments at the end of the first source word and at the beginning of the second source word. I have two examples for you here on this slide from German and Japanese. So we could imagine a compound by simply concatenating Kur and Urlaub, but because of the identity of the final segment in the first word and the initial segment in the second word, it feels not natural, but I might want to say tempting to want to simplify the output in a way and just have Kurlaub to mean exactly the same thing as Urlaub. And we have the same idea with Japanese baka plus kaparu, stupid couple, literally referring to lovebirds. And so instead of baka kaparu, this is a classic case of simplification of this repetition. And so we have subtraction simply by overlapping consecutive segments or clusters of segments. This is fairly frequent in blending, probably for a good reason, which I call the maximization of recognition of the source words. Because this is the main difficulty when one has to decode a new blend. Remember my initial example, Skyhacker. Of course, things are going to be relatively easier if you have overlapping, because it will increase the chances of recognizing both source word number 1 and source word number 2. I'll stop here with definitional matters for now, and I'm going to move on to the second section of my talk. Simply because, so I'm glad that the audience here is not primarily an Anglo or English audience. So this shows that there is an interest, and there are many blends outside of English. But if you are familiar with the international literature on lexical blending, you will probably agree with me that the focus is very often mostly on the English language. It might be because English is dominant, or it might be because actually there are very many blends in English. I believe that actually the second justification might be the better one, but I want to emphasize that this is for me one of the fascinating areas of blending research. It is to go beyond English to have a better grasp of all that is possible. And I want to give you a look of what I have been able to find, but of course, this was only a one-man endeavor, and I'm not aware, of course, of all that has been published on blending outside of English and in languages other than English, which I may not master. But I think it's really interesting to try to de-zoom, to try to adopt a typological perspective to see what is happening, how rare or how widespread is lexical blending beyond English, or maybe I should say beyond English and Portuguese. So as far as I know, there isn't much in the international literature, but I have found two interesting papers giving some idea of the spread, the aerial distribution, I should say, of blending. In a first paper by Pavel Stekar and it's a book, sorry, in a book by Pavel Stekar and his colleagues from 2012, it is claimed that lexical blending is an attested word formation process in a quarter of their sample of 55 languages that come from all parts of the world. There are two ways of looking at this number, quarter, 25, about 25%. It's a sizable and remarkable minority if you believe that blending is a rare phenomenon, but it remains a minority phenomenon because this also means that we can imagine, we can extrapolate that most languages do not have lexical blending as a morphological option to create formal neologisms. From an aerial point of view, Stekar and his colleagues give additional two interesting pieces of information. They remark that lexical blending is more concentrated in the languages of Europe more than on other continents. And then, as you know, that Europe boasts languages that belong to a variety of language families. Most languages, of course, belong to the Indo-European family of languages, but not all of them. And it seems that if you look at the languages of Europe, you have more lexical blends in sight. And if you focus on Indo-European languages, this is even clearer. In my research, I have also identified another area of the planet where lexical blends seem to be fairly frequent and recognized, especially in the linguistic literature. This is Southeast Asia, and the prominent language in that region of the world is Indonesian, which you may know is a standardized variety of Malay in Malay, thus, and Indonesian, and also in Tagalog, which is a language of the Philippines. We have a remarkable number and a remarkable frequency of the process of lexical blending. So it is true that there are many blends in English, and this is probably the main reason why this is discussed a lot in the English linguistic literature. It is also the case in other more exotic languages from a European perspective, for example, in Indonesian. The second element in my investigation that I would like to share with you is the fact that we can combine these two elements I just mentioned a minute ago. The fact that blends abound are very numerous in English, and also the fact that English is the primary lingua franca of the world, which is why I'm speaking to you in English today. And as you know, we have vast amounts of L2 speakers of English all over the world. And my hypothesis is that the frequency of blending in English has led to introducing or increasing the frequency, the appearance, and then the relatively frequent use of blending outside of English. The best example I have of this, and I have documented this in a fairly large number of neighboring countries which underwent the same political and sociolinguistic change. And so I believe that this is quite telling. If you look at Slavic and Baltic languages, lexical blending until very recently hadn't been recognized as a possible or productive word formation process. But if you read about neologisms, new possibilities of word formation or creation in all of these languages, you have a remarkable consonance. A variety of scholars basically say the same thing. There were basically no possibility of creating blends or testing blends until the Eastern Bloc collapsed, and as a sociolinguistic consequence, English became the new second language and the new second preferred language for a large number of the younger population especially. And nowadays, in the last 30 years, lexical blending has become popular in Bulgaria, in Latvia, in Poland, in Serbia, in Slovakia, in Ukraine, etc. This is a fascinating fact in my view, and I would like to offer a possible explanation for this phenomenon. I think that it appeared that this must be an innovation that appeared in two stages: borrowing the process and nativizing it through first the borrowing of words, and through the borrowing of words, the borrowing of the word formation process itself was gradually triggered. Here is my assumption, and here I'm taking a couple of examples from another Slavic language, which is Slovene. Slovene is attested to have adopted words like bankster and sextania, which are blends, and you can recognize bankster is actually an English word, but it's an English word that also works in the recipient language. If a Slovene speaker who doesn't know English analyzes bankster, They can do so because in bankster, they can recognize the Slovene word bankier, because of course it's based on the same etymon, and they can recognize the word gangster because it had already been borrowed into Slovene. So a non-English speaking Slovene speaker can understand that actually there is a new, curious, but maybe ingenious and funny way of creating new words by taking the beginning of bankier and the end of gangster. Same thing with sextania, which is not exactly the same form as the English sexting, but a Slovene speaker will recognize the word sex and will recognize the word textania, and they will understand that sextania is a combination of the two input words, and they can make a guess that it refers to the concept of sexting. And my assumption is that once people are aware that this possibility of creating new words exists, then gradually some of them may feel at ease with being innovative, and taking not simply English words as source words, but local words, for example, here Slovene words, as source words to create what I call the homegrown, local, if you want, locally grown, locally created blends. For example, Cosilo plus Cheria gives Cocheria, and this is not a blend, a blend that is a borrowing or a calque of something we formally have in English. I also believe that there is a connection between what is happening in English and in other languages for another reason, and I'm going to give you some more illustrations of this circulation of the awareness of this pattern, this new way of creating words in some languages. What I want to introduce is the fact that when I had a look at a variety of blends in a variety of different languages, I was struck by the fact that in many cases, the concepts which were adopted from English led to also the form of the new concept adopting the form of a blend. Vegilate, I guess, sorry, that must be the correct pronunciation in English, is a blend of vegetable plus chocolate. And interestingly, the translation or the correspondence in Serbian of vegilate is biliolada, which, unsurprisingly in a way, is a blend of biljina and chocolada. And what is interesting is that this kind of phenomenon is fairly widespread. I can give you examples in a number of languages. After Serbian, I have the same thing for German, herklären, to mansplain. So mansplain is man plus explain in English. It's a new blended verb of English. And ingeniously, in German, you have the same choice of blending her and erklären. Another illustration is Hungarian Xalagut, channel, the tunnel under the English channel. And here again, channel has been translated into the calque, the blended calque, Chalagut. Same thing in Swedish with the equivalent of staycation, a vacation where you stay at home. In Swedish, you have a blend of home, hem, and vacation, semester, hem plus semester giving hemester. This is remarkable enough that in some cases, I have examples in several languages for the same concept. Interestingly, these are new concepts, and a lot of languages may not already have a word to refer to this concept, and so fairly naturally they resort to using the process of lexical blending. So smog, which comes from the blending of smoke and fog, is a formal pattern or a formal choice in terms of process, which has also been adopted by languages as varied as modern Hebrew, and also Estonian, and also Indonesian, and also Spanish. So there is something here in terms of circulation, which is obvious. And again, I believe that the trigger is the English source word referring to a new concept. Whoop, that's it. I guess I have to warn everyone that I am now moving to section 3, and I would like to introduce the variety of blends one may come across in the variety of languages which boast blends. You may remember that I said that a lot of the descriptions of lexical blending focus primarily on English. I believe that it is still true, just also because English is our main lingua franca in the linguistics community. And a number of scholars also basically describe blending as the combination of the beginning of a source word and the ending of a second word. Remember, this is the AD pattern that I describe at the beginning of the presentation. But here, from a purely qualitative perspective, I want to emphasize the fact that there is more than just the AD pattern, especially if we're looking at other languages than English. And I have been able to find pretty much any combination of fragments. Any combination of fragments is virtually possible or attested, and I will come back to this. So these are just illustrations of this. AC means the combination of two initial fragments. This is, for example, the case in Korean tika. AD is well known. It's the beginning of the first source word and the ending of the second source word, as in German, jein, yes and no. Interestingly, you can find two endings, the ending of a first word and the ending of a second word. Chagomu in Japanese is cha plus agomu, the end of ocha plus the end of nagomu. I have an example from Brazilian Portuguese, but I'm not going to try to pronounce it because I don't want to ruin things. But see, you have the whole, well, I guess it's a borrowing from English, the whole word show, and you have the ending of the second word. And another case is you have ACD, which means the beginning of the first word and the whole of the second word, as in Norwegian elbil. So pretty much, I believe, pretty much anything is possible. This is what I would like to insist upon. To give you an illustration of this, to complicate things, but I do not want to complicate things too much, you may even find some quite complex combinations, and I believe that we still have beautiful and treasurable blends, if I may say so. English adorkable is a combination of adorable and dork, and if you think about it in terms of symbolization, it would mean something like an ACDB construct on the basis of AB plus CD, adorable plus dork. You may sometimes have ACE, French chaussée doux from chaussée, circulation, and doux from douce. And of course, one of my favorite blends, because it has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 source words, is the local name of the metropolitan area of the capital city of Indonesia, Jakarta. And so it's Jabodetabek-Punjur, which includes the beginning of each source word, except for the last one where you have the ending. And so it looks like a perfectly licit blend. It is widely attested in Indonesian. Things are quite complex, and I want to emphasize another fairly surprising element of variation and variability. You know that when we analyze compounding, we have typically no surprise. Semantic headedness is clearly either on the left-hand side or on the right-hand side. But if you analyze blends semantically in the same way as compounds, you may have surprises. You may know that English compounds are right-headed. The semantic head is on the right, but it is possible to find English blends which are semantically left-headed. For example, Newsac is news, which is Muzak-like. A raccoon is not a balloon, but a rocket fired from a balloon. And we have the same phenomenon, the same mirror phenomenon, I should say, in French. You may know that French has, French compounds have left semantic headedness. The head of a compound, this is typical in Romance languages, the head of a compound is on the left-hand side, but in blending, it is possible to have the semantic head on the right-hand side. Cécifoot is a kind of foot, a kind of soccer. It's blind soccer. Suplex is a kind of duplex apartment. So clearly here the head is on the right, which is a little bit surprising for blends if the norm is that we apply to compounds. I'd like to move on now from a qualitative to a quantitative perspective. From a qualitative perspective, as I said, I believe that pretty much almost anything is possible. But you shouldn't stop at that statement, because it is interesting to also add a quantitative view in your analysis of the phenomenon, whatever the language or the languages you are analyzing. And we can certainly see some tendencies, and these are important, illuminating if we want to better understand what is happening. Again, because of the primacy of English, there is, for me, this untold assumption that all languages form new blends in a way which is similar to what is happening in English. But actually, if you're looking at the quantitative side of things, the big surprise for me was that a lot of languages do not behave like English, which means that our general description of lexical blending, of course, cannot be limited to what we have said or what we have seen or what we know about English. Remember that I already said several times that AD is the typical pattern. This is what you read, this is what you expect, because this is what has been found when analyzing English. But if you get quantitative data on other languages, unfortunately, I haven't been able to get quantitative data for very many languages. But still, for those languages I have information, quantitative information about, the picture is quite contrasted. And English actually does not represent necessarily a majority behavior. 80 is the most frequent pattern in English. This is also true in Korean, but if you take languages like French, Italian, and Polish, actually it's ACD, which means the initial fragment of the first source word and the whole of the second source word that are blended together. And in a language like Indonesian, the most frequent pattern is actually the combination of two initial fragments rather than A and D, it's A and C. Another illustration of this variety of quantitative behaviors in the languages of the world is what is happening if you're looking at the size, by which I mean the number of syllables you have in each input, each source words, and in the output. Typically, the size of a blend, the number of syllables in a blend will be equal to the number of syllables in one of the two inputs, or maybe ideally in the two inputs. This is a general claim in the literature, and it can be verified in English. That is true. It seems to be also true in Korean and in Japanese, but in French, this is not the case. Blends in French typically have a size which is different from either input. So one should be very careful before introducing some generalizations. Not all blends in the languages of the world behave in the same way as in English. And so we need to be cautious when we're making generalizations and even when we are giving definitions which aim for a cross-linguistic value or truth. One last counterexample I have is the fact that the size of the blend corresponds to the size of one of its two source words. This is remarkably not true for AC blends made of two initial fragments. As you may know, because it seems to be regular, at least in the data I have found for French, English, Russian, and Japanese. Typically, when you have AC blending, you take the first syllable of the first source word and the first syllable of the second source word, and you blend them together. Another interesting phenomenon I want to emphasize, this is something that may have struck you when working on blends, is the fact that a remarkable number of blends have coordinative semantics, by which I mean that we can paraphrase the meaning of the blend by saying A and B, or a mix of A and B. This is not true in compounding in a majority of languages. If you take languages like English or French, I apologize because these are the only two languages I know very well, so I don't want to make sweeping generalizations, but at least in English and in French, coordinative units are very rare in compounding, and this is not true in blends. We have a lot of blends, a minority of blends, but a remarkable minority of blends have a coordinative meaning. I think this has an explanation, and this is illustrated by the different blends you can see here on the slide. I believe that the reason is iconic, is triggered by the linguistic principle of iconicity. There is a natural tendency to want to mimic the essential hybridity of the concept. The output is a mix of A and B. So formally, let's try to create a neologism which reflects this hybridity with a part of A and a part of B. This may be true of fruit, Italian mappo, tangelo, which is a hybrid fruit mixing the genes of the mandarin and of grapefruit. This can be true of some animals, zezel in Dutch, meaning zonky. Here again, you can see that there might be an influence of the term that exists in English for this concept, is a combination of zebra and ezel in Dutch. This also applies to artifacts, for example, English flumpet from flugelhorn plus trumpet, and it can work for a variety of concepts. I also have as a last illustration Spanish whiskola, whiskey plus cola. To conclude on this third section, here again, what is interesting is not only to remark from a qualitative perspective that everything is possible. So unlike compounding, blending can allow for left-headed and right-headed units, but there are tendencies. If you look at semantic headedness in blends in some languages like English, like Serbian, and like Ukrainian, semantic headedness is primarily on the right-hand side, just like compounding in these languages. And more surprisingly, not only a language like French allow left and right-headed semantic headedness, but it does not seem to have any preference. It doesn't seem to be governed by the same tendencies as compounding, and remarkably, but I do not have data in enough languages to make a strong generalization, remarkably, English, Serbian, Ukrainian are languages in which compounding is canonically right-headed. And on the other hand, in French and in modern Hebrew, compounding is canonically left-headed. And when you have left-headedness in compounding, it seems that blends behave erratically, or I should say, do not manifest any preference for right or left-headedness. It's some sort of balance, maybe it's some sort of neutralization of opposing tendencies. I would like to have more data in more languages to be more sure of what can be claimed here. I'm going to move on to my last section and discuss current debates among linguists, and also point at a number of interesting areas for future research. There is disagreement as to the grammatical status of blends. Some scholars believe that blends are grammatical, and others say that blends are extra-grammatical. I believe that it all depends on your definition of grammaticality or extra-grammaticality. I believe that in the specialized literature, this is related, grammaticality is related to unconsciousness and to regularity and predictability. And so if we can find elements of consciousness and irregularity and unpredictability, we might assume that the phenomenon of blending is more extra-grammatical than strictly grammatical. I think everyone agrees, at least in the literature I'm familiar with, on the fact that blends are conscious manipulations. The difficulty is to decide where to side in terms of predictability versus unpredictability. I think the common ground could be that there is predictability from a probabilistic standpoint. As I was saying a few minutes ago, there are clear quantitative preferences, tendencies, But at the same time, I think there might be fairly broad agreement on the fact that you cannot predict everything that is happening in the process of blending. I believe personally that as soon as the potential blended output is phonotactically correct, licit, as long as it sounds like a concatenation of possible phonemes and syllables, a blend is grammatically licit, is acceptable by speakers. I would say that actually it doesn't work very well to ask people if a new blend is grammatical or not. Anything that is phonetically viable works, in my view. Additionally, I believe that blending is to be distinguished fairly clearly from compounding as an independent process of word formation, because some things that are licit or grammatical in compounding, some things that are illicit in compounding are allowed in blending, which is another way of saying what I've been repeating, which is that a lot of things and almost everything is possible. For example, in modern Hebrew, you cannot create a noun-adjective compound, or an adjective plus noun compound, or a noun plus verb compound, or a verb plus noun compound. I should specify that I'm talking about nominal compounds. This is not possible for compounding, but this is allowed. This is okay for blending. Same thing for French. We cannot create a new verb in French by concatenating a noun and a verb, or two verbs, but in blending, it becomes possible. Noun plus verb, cadonner, cadeau is a noun and donner is a verb. Accumonceler, accumuler plus amonceler, these are two synonymous verbs. One last example of the complexity of blending is the fact that gender assignment is not obvious, as should be the case in a grammatical standardization of the phenomenon. I have a few examples of French blends where people disagree on gender assignment. And this instability, in my view, is another example of the extra grammaticality of blends. So cavurne from caveau, which is masculine, and urne, which is feminine, is in French un cavurne or une cavurne. It is not clear, even though the semantics is clear. Canarois is canard plus oie. Canard is masculine, oie is feminine. Canarois is sometimes used in the feminine and sometimes in the masculine. So I believe that because of a variety of elements I have reviewed here, we should be able to conclude that blending is remarkably different from compounding. It's an extragrammatical word formation process. This does not mean, however, that you cannot find some degree of regularity of predictability, but not full regularity and predictability, and explanations which are typically the hallmarks of concatenative morphology, affixation, and compounding. There is one last element I would like to bring to the discussion, because this is another element of controversy in the blending literature. A number of scholars consider that blends made of two initial fragments are not blends, but something else. They usually do not clearly characterize what this something else is, but this is a fairly frequent and maybe dominant view in the literature. And this, of course, has some linguistic basis. It is fairly well known that AC constructs, I can avoid the word blends for now, if you are not a believer in inclusivity like me. AC constructs are different from, for example, AD constructs in English, and this is also true in other languages. As mentioned a few minutes ago, they do not manifest size inheritance. The size of the output is not the same as the size as one of the inputs, is just one syllable plus another syllable. So a disyllabic output. You have fewer occurrences of segment overlap in AC constructions. You have less segmental similarity between the two inputs in AC constructs. And also AC constructs in many more cases corresponds to contractions of multi-word units. So clearly we do have some differences in formal behavior between AC constructs and other constructs, typically AD constructs. But I think that this is not the best way to approach the question, and we need to take a detour to, in my view, understand what is essentially at play in the analysis of these formations. I want to go back to a key distinction made in the literature by John Algeo between two types of blends, which he calls syntagmatic blends and associative blends. Syntagmatic blends, in his view, in his terminology, refers to the combination of two source words that occur sequentially in discourse. So similar to those multi-word units I was referring to a minute ago. And he speaks of another origin of lexical blending, which he calls associative and associative blending. This is a combination of source words that do not occur sequentially, but were originally linked in the mind of the original blend maker. And Algeo makes a very interesting and very important statement in my view. He says that although syntagmatic blends born out of contraction are usually classified as blends, a consistent taxonomy would regard them merely as contractions. My claim is that the essential difference is not at the formal level between AC blends on the one hand and non-AC blends on the other hand. In my view, the essential distinction is between this associative strategy of novel naming versus the syntagmatic strategy of compacted renaming of an original multi-word unit. And my perspective is onomasiological rather than semasiological. And I would like to claim that a consistent taxonomy ought to separate units of novel naming on the one hand from units of compacted renaming on the other hand, rather than AC units from non-AC units. And to make my case, I would like to introduce a final set of blends. This is essential in my view, because most scholars, I believe, have overlooked two facts. First, that AC units do not always correspond to compacted renaming, and also AD units do not always correspond to compacted renaming. And I'm giving a few examples. Of course, there is a general tendency for AC units to correspond to compacted renaming, but this is not strict. And so we have to be more careful, I believe. Ray win from radar plus wind is an AC unit, which does not occur sequentially in discourse to refer to the said concept. And same thing for moped in Swedish, which was borrowed into English. And some AD units are not instances of novel naming, but of compacted renaming. In Indonesian, minuman keras has a pattern which is beginning plus ending, mi, ras. In French, pistolet plus laser. In English, quagma is the beginning of quark plus the beginning of gluon and the ending of plasma. My conclusion is that even though AC constructs are overwhelmingly units of compacting renaming, if the class of blends is to be restricted to cases of novel naming, the problem is that associative AC blends should be included and syntagmatic AD blends should be excluded. I don't think this is satisfactory, and my own conclusion is that it seems preferable to adopt an inclusive, prototype-based approach to categorization and to definition, and to include AC, AD, and all patterns under the umbrella term and the concept of blending itself. Just one last word as a general conclusion to emphasize what I believe is important, or in my view, even essential for future research in blending. This is the logical conclusion of a lot of things I just introduced to you. First, I think that we need to better map, better document the variability of the outputs of lexical blending in the languages of the world. The job has been mostly done for English and some other languages, but we need to look at more languages to better understand the phenomenon, both from a qualitative perspective and also from a quantitative perspective, because I hope to have shown you convincingly that the two perspectives are complementary. This will help us in better understanding how things work in individual languages, and it will also be immensely helpful to better understand things cross-linguistically. The second area of exploration, which in my view will be very interesting, is to go beyond what I just introduced in the last few slides. It is quite complex to see how formal elements and functional elements, the different patterns and the function of novel naming and the function of compacted renaming are blended, if I may say so. And so I think there is more work to do there. And I hope that maybe some of you will have the time and stamina to continue these explorations, so that we can have maybe another workshop of blending down the road to continue discussion on this fascinating morphological phenomenon. This is my final word. Here are the references to the key authors I mentioned. I can highlight a reference which is Renner 2023, which is a book chapter which is about to be published. It will be out in the fall, and you will find a lot of the data and of the analyses I have just presented. I hope I wasn't too long, and I'm happy now to answer any questions you may have on blends. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much, Vincent, for this very comprehensive bird's view over blending. Let me just make a brief note about why we're here and why we are so keen on blends. Our main interest, our main focus is on word processing, morphological processing, and lexical access. And we thought that blends could be an innovative way of looking into this phenomenon. And that is why we are very focused on Portuguese blends, not only Brazilian Portuguese, but also European Portuguese blends. But this said, in this room, there are people from all over Brazil, and perhaps on internet, people from many other places who don't have this exact same focus. So let me open the discussion to everybody in the room, and we probably have a chance to chat a little bit later.
Okay. Thank you.
And can you please stop sharing your screen?
Yes.
So that we can, okay, thank you. Perfect. So, questions from the audience, please. Come on. Don't be shy.
I have one.
Okay.
Hello, Professor. Thank you for your brilliant talk. In the final of your talk, I perceived a little bit information about the grammaticality of blends, and you said that blends are impervious to ungrammatically judgments. So I would like to know if you know some study or paper that deal with some kind of grammatically judgment test in order to verify this statement. Do you know some kind of? It seems to me very interesting to investigate manipulating different experimental conditions involving phonetically patterns and put it to judgment to people. So this is an interesting topic to investigate for me. So do you know some kind of study using this methodology?
Thank you for
grammatically judgment.
Thank you very much for your question. I think this is a very interesting question. And I understand that it may be related to your interest precisely in morphological processing, because this could be one way of connecting these issues. Unfortunately, from the top of my head, I do not believe that I have a reference. I believe that this is based on personal judgment. I think that this is something I read in a paper by Professor Elke Ronneberger-Siebold. This is, I think it was not experimentally tested, maybe because it may remain some sort of an intuition. The way I understand Ronneberger-Siebold, or I apply, or I take her comment, is to say that you can make judgments to say that a blend may be better than another one. Remember, and I will refer to what Laurie Bauer says in his initial quote, that he talks about a good blend. But to me, this adds to the complexity, because we may not agree on what a good blend is, and maybe this could be another idea for research and experimental testing. Ask people, ask subjects, do you believe that this is a good blend, a felicitous blend? And you will have different answers. But if your question is in grammatical terms, is it a possible blend? Is it an acceptable blend in the language, even if you think that it's not a good one? But is it acceptable in the language? My view is that you should be very open, and it seems to me that you cannot say, no, this, for example, that happens sometimes. It happens that you have two even lexicalized blends for with the same two inputs. Let me take an example like plum plus apricot. Some farmers in California, I believe, have been experimenting with hybrid forms of the two types of fruit, plum and apricot, and they have created several blends. Plum plus apricot has given plumcot, and it's the first output. They have also created pluot, and it's the second output. They have also created apricot, and you could say that maybe plumcot is better than pluot, or pluot sounds better than plumcot, but you cannot say that one is grammatical and the other is not grammatical. Whereas if I'm asking you to create a new compound, or if I'm asking you to create a new affixed word, you would not have this type of discussion. So I think that blends are very different in this way. But grammatically, I don't think we have elements to clearly support a view which would be on grammaticality of the output, unless the element taken into account is the phonotactics of the language in question. So to finish my answer and to go back to your initial prompt and question, I don't think it has been done. And probably you're right that in an approach that is rigorous scientifically, it would be worth trying, and this could be a very good idea. But then you would have to very carefully decide on what your definition of grammaticality is. But this would be, in my view, a worthy topic of investigation. I can only encourage you to go down that path if you want to. Yes.
Thank you for your answer. I will discuss this point with my research group.
All right.
Thank you. Anybody else? Questions, please? No?
Gustavo, alguém do chat?
Well, meanwhile, I can at least tell you something about what the course of our research. We now have a more or less 500 words corpus. And since we decided to test them both offline and online, and try to find out how people recover the information about blends, which constituent predominates in comprehension. We needed to have a very strict description of the corpus. So what we found out so far is that we can cover almost all the categories that you have discussed, you have described, and we have eliminated from our study those that were very far off the mainstream course of blend formation. And that's all we can talk about for the time being. And our findings were very surprising, because we have noticed that there is a kind of superposition between the prosodic dominant base, the head, and the clipped form, which is very counterintuitive. So people tend to recover the constituent that is clipped, in the blend. We are still in the middle of our project. We still have a year and a half to proceed, and I hope that we'll have more tests to either falsify or consolidate our hypothesis. But so far, it's a kind of Pandora box that has been opened and is full of surprises. It is very, very interesting.
Yes, thank you for sharing this. If I may, this would trigger questions on my part on what you are doing.
Sure.
If I may ask, this is what you're describing is very interesting. And the two ideas I have, or out of curiosity, I would have two questions. I would like to know if you control two key variables in my view. The fact that you may have different types of blends, and are you working on only novel blends, which are not expected to be known by the subjects, or only lexicalized blends, which are more or less known within the community, or are you working with both novel and relatively or fully lexicalized blends? That would be my first question. And my second curious question would be to ask you if you are presenting your data in context or out of context. Do you ask people to recognize blend which are isolated words, or in a context which well, it would lead us maybe too far, because there would be different types of context. There would be context to just guess the meaning. There would be context where maybe the source words will already appear or be alluded to. This goes in the same direction as what you were saying, is that we're actually opening a Pandora's box when we're thinking, because there are so many variables to take into account, and maybe a year and a half is not going to be enough to
it won't, which is a good thing, because we will probably have another project to work on. Well, let me try to reply. We are testing in isolation, simple words, okay? No context, because context will enforce the subjects to maybe to a given answer. We don't know. We haven't tested yet. Only isolated forms. As to the other question, we are testing novel blends, not lexicalized blends. Lexicalized blends behave like simple words, so we are not interested to focus on that. And finally, we have settled three categories: coordinated blends, head initial blends, and head final blends. And the surprise effect was that head initial blends are typically clipped on the left and prosodically dominant on the left, and head final blends, which are much more numerous. There are many more head final blends than head initial blends. They are clipped on the right, and they are prosodically predominant on the right. This is regarding modification structures. Coordinated structures behave differently, and it seems that the first constituent is more salient than the second constituent, but I am not too sure about that. And there is another issue, which is that nouns adjectives and verbs probably behave differently, because we have nouns are dominantly head final blends. Verbs and adjectives are typically coordinated blends, which is not surprising.
Yes, I see. And so may I also ask where or how you got your novel blends? Did you create, you didn't create them yourselves, right?
No.
Okay, so they are novel, but they were created by unknown speakers, and they were called from a neologism database, I assume, right?
Well, we have all sorts of sources. We have the sources from the linguistics literature, which was our point of depart, which was Raphael's work, the collection of this first set in 2018 when he had a postdoc in Lisbon with me. And so he brought this set, which is mainly from literature and from advertising and other sources of political comment, etc. Then the pandemics helped us a lot because we had lots of time to listen to news and to whatever kind of inputs were. So practically every day we find a new blend, and we list it. And we have also done another thing, which was to register the original context and the original source. Where did we find it? In which context? And something that we have already found out is that the intention that the blend is created with is different. Is often different from how it is perceived by an innocent, naive subject, you know? So it's a bit different from the other word formation processes because it is a bit dissimilar in the formation and in the understanding. So that is why we are always collecting new forms.
Okay, well, yeah, this is fascinating, and and can be endless because it's full of complexities, and so I'm looking forward to reading some results sometime down the road. I'm sure it will give rise to a number of publications. So I'm looking forward to learning more about your final or interim results at the end of your project.
Thank you very much. We will certainly publish something in the near future. And I may even invite you to come to Lisbon next year because we will have a second workshop there. So it's a bit closer.
Very nice of you. That's very nice of you. Thank you. We'll see if that can be worked out. Yes.
Yeah, or at least we can already also again participate in this remote form, which is, well, better than nothing.
Definitely.
So,
apparently it's time to finish. Let me thank you again for your very kind participation in this very interesting but modest workshop. It was our pleasure. Thank you very much.
The pleasure was shared, and to all the audience, please don't hesitate to contact me by email if you have any questions, have follow-up questions. I'll be happy to be in touch with all of you if you want to be in contact for any type of questions on blending. So I wish you a nice ending of the conference, and I hope to have the chance to see some of you maybe one day in Lyon, maybe one day in Brazil, or maybe halfway, not really halfway, but in Lisbon. It's on the way to Brazil, right? From Lyon.
Yeah, it is. At least psychologically. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Insert.
Viu?
Pronto, está feito.
Intervalo para o café e para as discussões sobre o que acabamos de ouvir. Eu gostei que a professora explica o nosso projeto para ele, né?
Ele
Francamente, eu acho que você vai interessante.
Se ele chegar à conclusão que é um processo extragramatical, não podíamos estar em postos mais opostos, em polos mais opostos. Não é? Porque a gente acha exatamente o contrário, acha que é gramatical e que é tudo explicável.
Ele saiu.
Hã? Não,
Saiu.
Mas não se vou.
Não, tudo bem, mas ele não está no certo. Mas ele não está mais aí.
Ai, não estamos a transmitir para todo o Brasil. Temos esta parte final.